a little bit of information at the very beginning to explain to you how the webinar works, and if you have any questions or that, how we'll address those. So the webinar is being recorded for your convenience, so everyone who has registered for the webinar will get a link and a copy to the particular webinar. All of the attendees right now are in mute mode, so if you do have a question, please utilize the question function in the GoToWebinar control panel. And as you ask those questions, I'll make sure to take some time at the very end of the presentation, the very end of the webinar, to answer those particular questions. Again, I'd like to thank you for spending your time with me today, and we're going to go ahead and get started. So again, I'd like to welcome everybody to this series, Sales Hacker Guide to the Galaxy. This is Volume 4, Story Selling, and we've kind of titled it, How Great Salespeople, quote unquote, great salespeople connect to customers through storytelling. And I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit. My name is Derek. I am the Chief Sales Hacker here at ZynBit, and you may follow me on LinkedIn, or you may also follow my Twitter handle at Real Sales Advice on Twitter. So to get started, storytelling or story selling, why is story so important for salespeople? Well, I really think when you look at what's going on in sales today, and how we're trying to communicate to our customers and communicate to our prospects and communicate to a whole host of other people that we're trying to go ahead and sell our products and services to, we have to understand that we need to communicate to them in a way that they're used to being communicated to, and in a way that's valuable to them. And that's why I believe storytelling is probably the single most important skill set a B2B salesperson can excel at from this point forward in time. And it's very, very basic. I mean, if you take a look at, you may have been a fan of Mad Men on AMC, a fantastic show. I believe it ran 5 or 6 seasons. It had a lot of deep characters, a lot of deep plot lines, but at the end of the day, if you just broke it down into data points, into actual data points, Mad Men was just about a bunch of guys in advertising in the 60s that smoked and drank a lot, and they were kind of greedy and they were a little selfish. And that's it. So when you break something down to a core data point, it really doesn't resonate. It really doesn't grab your attention. However, when you're talking about story, that's kind of how human beings communicate. It's been the way ever since there have been human beings. If you take a look at the very beginning of even pre-recorded history, there's a cave in France which is just covered in cave paintings. It's about 20,000 years old, and they record real-life events, and they're telling stories about hunts, and they're telling stories about, about real life in the day of those particular people, and they were telling stories to each other. So when you take a look at the way we communicate as human beings, story is the way that resonates with us. It's what we remember. It's what we understand. Story is all around us. It's in basic things like books and periodicals. It's on the internet and blogs. Streaming media is full of story. There's many within the media industry who believe that today is the golden age of television, because there are so many channels and so many streaming opportunities for great television. It's not the 1950s or the 1940s for television. It's now. Now is the golden age. Social media tells great stories, and of course marketing. Marketing is all about stories. But why is story so important to sales? Well, you may know this guy. Name is Mike Bosworth. He's the father of solution selling and the father of custom-centric selling. If you've ever sold a solution, you've not only probably read his books, you've probably taken courses based on his books. Solution selling existed before Challenger, it existed after Spin, and it was the way people sold software and a whole bunch of technology for a great many years. Well, Mike himself has come to the realization that after 20 years of providing people solution selling and customer-centric selling, he realized that only 20% of salespeople were getting any value from his training. And the big chasm was that 80%, they weren't really getting anything from this training. And he realized by taking a look at his data that the 20% that were succeeding not because they followed solution selling, hook, line, and sinker. They succeeded because they knew how to do one thing that is really ignored in the business world, and that's tell great stories. And when it comes right down to it, Mike has really refocused his whole training program and his whole outreach to salespeople really built around the art and the skill of storytelling. Now, there's reasons for this, and it's not just because we like it or it feels good. There's some chemical reasons. There's some actual biochemical reasons why we listen to story, while our brains listen to story. See, the problem is most salespeople and sales organizations and sales presentations deal with facts and figures. 85% of this, 4 out of 5 dentists do this, and we want to communicate these facts and figures, and that we're trying to communicate to the neocortex in the brain. That's the part of the brain that makes decisions. That's the part of the brain that understands facts and figures. And then sometimes we try to communicate as a trusted advisor or as a friend, and that's where we communicate to the middle brain. And the middle brain is what controls all of our social interaction and our social intelligence. The problem is, before you can communicate to either one of those brains, you have to get down to our core brain, our brainstem, our reptilian brain. And that's the part of the brain that controls our emotions. Orrin Claff wrote a great book about this, specifically about this a couple years back, called Pitch Anything. I urge you to go ahead on Amazon and get a copy. But quite honestly, what he's talking about is you have to be able to communicate emotionally, connect emotionally to your prospect before they'll even listen to your facts and figures, and before they'll even try to go ahead and establish what we in sales call rapport, that ability, that relationship that we so richly want with our particular customers. Now, there is specific science behind this. This isn't just a bunch of gobbledygook. There's some chemical reasons why this happens and why story itself is particularly effective when communicating to human beings. And it's in our brain chemistry. The very first thing, there's this chemical called cortisol. And what happens is this is our ability, whenever you feel a tendency to focus on the bad or threatening things in life, when you look down that hallway, that dark hallway, and you feel that little shiver on the back of your neck, that's your brain. That's your brain. That's the chemicals. That's the chemical reaction within your brain that is understanding the development of this particular conflict, this conflict you have in yourself. Then this particular neuropeptide is released when people feel close to each other. So, and it can be people, it can be things. So when you're petting a puppy, or when you're walking down a beach with the one that you love, that's the feeling that you get when you feel close to that person. These neurons in our brain will fire when we either perform or observe someone else doing the exact same action. So when you're watching a movie, or when you're reading a book and someone's crying, or someone feels scared, or someone feels hungry, and you mirror that within yourself, that's what's happening chemically within your brain. And when all of this gets combined, in great storytelling, we are transported. We're transported from our own individual existence, and we transport ourselves into experiencing exactly what the story is talking about, exactly what the character is talking about. And again, what is this? At the very base, this is something we call emotions. We do it every day. We do it without thinking about it, but there are specific chemical reasons why we do those things. So marketing people have known this for years. Anytime you watch a commercial, anytime you look at an ad, anytime you look at a digital ad, when you hear phrases like Coke is it, or when you even take a look at things like this old Michelin ad, what marketers are trying to do is they're tapping into that emotion, they're tapping into those parts of your brain, that parts of your brain chemistry, in order to go ahead and communicate to you. Now you can see right here the development of conflict in this particular ad is, if I have a baby and I want my baby to quote unquote survive, I better buy Michelin tires. It doesn't come right out and say that, but because my brain is wired that way, the very first thing I think of when I look at this is like, oh, I don't want that baby to expire. so I better buy some Michelin tires. That's exactly what marketers have been doing for years. Now the problem is that we in sales have been ignoring this for a long period of time. We've been focusing on specific actions to go ahead and get into the next action. So what's the reason, and this is a personal belief, what's the reason I think that sales has really fallen behind on the art of storytelling and the ability to teach storytelling to salespeople that are coming up through the ranks? This is a little joke, but I think it's because you don't need a credit card number for that. All of the information that I'm about to communicate to you and that I've curated for you is freely available to you as an individual with an internet browser. It has nothing to do with buying my special cold calling program. It doesn't have anything to do with my belief or someone's belief that reps are lazy and you have to crack the whip and you have to make sure they enter all their data in the CRM. It even doesn't have to do with a lot of stuff that's been talked about now where statistics and data is wrong and people shouldn't listen to it and salespeople should just buckle down and do their thing. There's a lot of profit margin to deal with that level of message. And the information I've curated for you, again, I've curated it for you and to provide you in this format, hopefully will go ahead and provide you a value. But you can go ahead and do a search on a Google site saying storytelling, and you can have virtually the world is your oyster, as you know, as it is to get this level of information to you. So, or if you really want to, you can spend a couple of bucks and go down to the college, community college annex, and take a literary writing course. But what I'm communicating to you here is specifically the way you can develop story in the sales process. And there's a point to this. And the point really is this. I think the key is people like me, a salesperson, we're not going to be able to succeed in what I call the new normal without becoming an expert storyteller. I personally believe, and I think the evidence is showing this, that a lot of non-storytelling or story selling processes within sales can be either automated or outsourced. I believe if you cannot sell the why through targeting an audience, connecting with them, and providing valuable content, there's really going to be no need for the skills that we've developed in sales, like getting the meeting or negotiating price or closing them by the end of the quarter, because I truly believe a lot of that is going to be automated. And yeah, you may not believe me. You may believe that, you know, salespeople are going to be necessary, especially business-to-business salespeople, because it's a very complex process, and people need people to buy things from. Well, I just, you know, ask you to go ahead and think about, you know, how one buys cars today as opposed to how one buys cars 20 years ago or even 10 years ago. The fact of the matter remains that most people do not like going to a dealership to negotiate with a salesperson and buy a car. Very few people enjoy that, and you know, it's almost universal. Car salespeople, especially used car salespeople, have a stereotype that affects all of us within the sales community, right? And the very worst thing a customer could say to one of us on this phone is, "Boy, Derek, you sound like a used car salesman," right? So there's a very negative connotation with that. So technology has been developed to get away from that. And technologies like TrueCar allow people who don't want to deal with a physical salesperson to buy their Audi to go online and do it. And TrueCar isn't the only people that are doing this. Amazon now is providing in Europe the ability to put together a car from Fiat online on their website and then go to a Fiat dealership and pick up exactly the car that you ordered. So this is being tested out. This is being used in the real world. If you want to go even further than that, talk about the end of the car salesman, what happens when we all have self-driving cars, or self-driving cars are part of the public space, and we no longer have to buy cars, and we have self-driving Ubers that are running around. And people are really thinking about this. This isn't just, you know, some nutty people that are, you know, Motor Trend is releasing articles this year talking about the reality of this may happen. This could be something that happened where people born today will never have to have a driver's license. So these are real things to think about. And the fact of the matter is this: I don't want to bet my career or my family's well-being on the fact that I know how to negotiate a deal real well, or I know how to move a deal through a pipeline real well. I need to be able to tell a story to make myself valuable to the very beginning of the process, which is capturing the attention of my prospect or customer. So when we think about it, what really is story selling? Well, story selling is, I believe it's elemental. It's using elements of our life, using elements of story to communicate to suspects, to prospects, and to customers. And you have to communicate to all three. And there's different ways to communicate to all three. I think there are things that are universal about story selling. I think it is something that we all do as humans. These are base emotions: love, fear, anger, frustration. These are things we can communicate in story, and that will interconnect us with our suspects, our prospects, and our customers. I don't believe storytelling needs to be verbal. It can be medium neutral. It can be an article, it can be an email, it can be a meme, it can be a video, it could be a jingle, it can be an image. The ability to tell a story is not reduced to the ability to speak words. But I also believe storytelling should be actionable. Now, we're not writing mysteries here. This shouldn't be Murder, She Wrote or Miss Marple. We don't want our customers, our prospects, or our suspects guessing on what's actionable. Our stories should imprint the next action in our audience's mind before it's stated, and then that way they can take the journey with us, as opposed to them being surprised at the end of the chapter. I do believe salespeople really need to understand our customers and what interests them in order to sell, or in order to tell a corresponding story. I think without this level of insight, the old adage for writing is write what you know. The ability for us to craft these stories within our sales process really begins with what we know. Now, here's some very, very basic storytelling 101 information that you can get. I just put it in this little graph here for you. But there are 5 elements of any particular story. I think 4 of them are incredibly important to story selling. I don't think the setting of a story is normally very important when you're dealing with fiction or something else like that. But when you're dealing with story selling, the setting is here and now. Right? I mean, that's primarily the setting. So the 4 that we really are going to concentrate on are theme, plot, characters, and conflict, and how we're able to build on those and craft a valuable story for our clients. So let's look at a classic example of a story. And I went way back in history to pull this particular classic story, and it's the story of All Cultures Have One of Iron Man. And I laugh at that, but if you take a look at comic books and comic book movies and how popular they are right now, they are all based in very ancient mythology. They are stories that the Greeks told each other. We just wrap ours in iron or in capes or in leotards or spandex and put them on the movie screen here. But these are classic stories. And we take a look at a story like Iron Man, there is a theme. And the theme is power in itself should be used to protect the innocent, not for personal gain. And when you help others, you help yourself. And that's a common theme. If you think of all superhero movies, most superhero movies have to deal with something like that. And that goes way back to the beginnings of story on those, when we're getting painted on caves and in antiquity, when we have the stories of Greek mythology. Power is a constant theme. Characters. In Iron Man, there's particularly one very important character, but he's a dual character, Tony Stark and Iron Man. There's a conflict within himself as well as a conflict with the bad guys. And as you watch the movie or read the story in the comic book, the conflict between Stark and his Iron Man persona is probably the most important conflict. And again, this is a thread that runs through all comic book movies, whether it be Spider-Man or Superman or Batman. There is that duality of personality that creates conflict. And it's something that we as human beings feel in our daily lives. Are we the person that we put on the face to show everybody else, or are we somebody else? So we all have this duality of nature in ourselves, so it communicates to us. It resonates. Plot In comic books, it's very basic. In Iron Man, it's a standard 3-act play. It's a linear narrative, meaning this happens, so this happens, which causes this happens, and it's propelled by goals that the character is supposed to attain. And then there's conflict, and the conflict is always overcoming personal faults, overcoming weakness, or in the end, overcoming the bad guy. And so that's a classic example of story. And if you think about every show that you like, every book that you like reading, every movie that you've enjoyed, there are elements of, I think, this construction and this type of theme in all of them. So story selling, I think there's 3 parts. When you get the theme and the characters and everything else together, I think there are 3 specific parts for story selling that you have to communicate to a client in order for it to resonate to them. I think it's communication and understanding of the past, where we came from and what that means to the customer. I think the present has to be identified, the world we live in now and what it means to the customer. And I think the future, the world as it should be, and how we, you and I, as the customer and the vendor get there. So let's delve a little bit deeper into what I'm talking about here, the past. Understanding the past, understanding what life was like for your customers in the quote-unquote good old days. And we as human beings tend to look back on our lives and in a nostalgic way. And many of us look back on our lives in a nostalgic way. We miss simpler times. We miss the times when people did certain things or life was a certain way. More often than not, when you speak to your customers on a daily basis, there is some level of nostalgia for the way their business used to be, the way business used to be, the way people used to be. So I think this is a part of story selling that you need to incorporate into your narrative, and understanding that your customer, that your audience feels a certain way about the past. And then there's the recognition of the present and the ability to understand what's going on right now within the customer's world and life. How are they evolving, or how are they trying to evolve to meet certain challenges? And not only understanding that, but understanding the environment, understanding what they do on a regular basis, on a daily basis, understanding their customers. This is all kind of part of that. And then the future. The future part of the story is the ability to say, you know, here is a place we want to go. Here is a future that looks good to us. This is the best state of future reality. And how can you and I, the customer and the vendor, move forward and get to that place together? Now there is a really good example, I think, of grasping people within a story, and that's, I think, magicians. Magicians are very good in a very, very basic kind of, communicating story. When you take a look at a magician is usually showing you something. That shows you something. They call it a pledge, but here's a deck of cards, here's a person, here's a statue. And then what they do is they go ahead and they do a turn, and that's what their second act is. So they've showed you the past, and now they're showing you the present where you can't see what's going on, and they make this thing disappear. And you're amazed that they've made it disappear. But you know in the future that thing has to be here. So you're waiting. The trick isn't over. Every magic trick has 3 parts. And the reason is you're waiting for that future state. And the future state is what's called the prestige, which when the actual object comes back. And that's when you're delighted. That's when you have this feeling of wow, and you understand, the story that the magician went ahead and told you. Now this, I don't expect people to go out and buy magic cards and do coin tricks for their customers, but what I did want to do is I wanted to explain to you that it doesn't have to be a narrative story in a sense of you writing something for you to be able to communicate something like that. So let's talk about building a story this way, and I'm going to use a couple examples, one of mine and one of a third party. I wanted to build a story, and the theme I wanted was salespeople have to change in order to succeed or survive. And the characters I put together was specifically the salespeople and the companies that they worked for. The conflict that I put in was technology as it exists today and the buyer's journey. And the basic plot was traversing the changing terrain to make sales, and then how we at ZynBit can help, right? So that was kind of the story that I wanted to go ahead and craft. So the story I wrote was an article about B2B sales, and you may have read it. It's the one that says nobody cares what you want. And basically what it is, it's I construct a past where sales reps used to be able to live in a world where making quota, basically guaranteed you employment. But today, with companies like Oracle and Ricoh and others laying thousands of salespeople off, many of them that are already at quota, that's really no longer the case. And in the future, that future state I communicated was we will soon live in a world where so much is automated. We have to meet the future and learn different skills and do different things to get there. And here's how my solution can help. So that's a very basic way in a written sense of how to communicate a story in what I call story selling. Let's take a look at a different example, and this has nothing to do with ZynBit or anything else, and you looked at the company earlier. People hate shopping for cars, right? I think that's a universal theme most people can understand. The character in the story is you as the common person. The conflict is basically the thought of dealing with car salespeople makes one's stomach hurt. And then the plot is specifically taking somebody through the way to buy a car in 2017. And again, what you have is, here's an example of TrueCar, where you have the ability where the past is dealing with that salesperson that you didn't want to, getting in your car, driving down to the dealership, and having to deal with the salesperson. The present is the technology that exists, which is TrueCar, in order to make this event in your life, which everyone has, much less stressful. And the future, and if you go to this website and you watch this little 30-second video, the future is this individual, every woman, this person is actually enjoying her car buying process, which is the antithesis of how most people feel about buying cars today. So here's an example of, again, this is not in a written kind of way, but this is in a 30-second video, and I suggest you go, this video is on the TrueCar website. Take a look at it and understand how that's all communicated within a 30-second video. And that really begs the question, stories are multi-channel. They're not something that you just simply write down in a book or write down in an article and forward someone. Stories can take place in phone calls. They can take place in emails, in your meetings and demos, and even over social media. And the way I particularly craft these stories in these much smaller media slices is with something I call micro stories. And these are very effective ways to communicate a message I want to, again, get an emotional reaction. Because that's what I want. I don't want somebody telling me, oh, I believe you when you say 75% of people that utilize ZynBit have much smarter children. That's not important for me for them to remember a statistic. What I want is I want to initiate a feeling in them, so it makes them want to get more of that feeling, or it makes them want me to help remove that feeling, whatever it is. So micro stories, one of the best examples of a micro story is it may be apocryphal, but it is supposedly by Ernest Hemingway, and he actually told a story in 6 words, and that story was simply for sale, baby shoes, never worn. And if you go to Wikipedia, it gives a little story behind the story about how it was supposedly a bet in a bar, and he was able to tell this story to other authors. But if you remember the slides a few slides back when I talked about brain chemistry and our ability or our want to focus on the negative of things as opposed to the positive, I would argue that looking at those 6 words, most of us on this webinar thought the negative of that. Thought a negative connotation of that particular story. Some may have thought of a positive, maybe the shoes were too small for the baby or something else like that, but most of us probably thought in the negative. And again, that's not a conscious thing that we do. That's specifically our brain chemistry doing that. So if our brain chemistry is going to do that, we have to create stories and media, within certain media, these micro stories that will go ahead and elicit that reaction from our customers and from our prospects. So this is how I do it. I think micro stories can go ahead and provide you emotional connection. And one of the ways I do this, I believe most effectively, at least my customers say most effectively, is the creation of memes or the sharing of memes. But the ability to share information this way elicits a reaction. And it's not just humor. It's not just the ability to laugh, because what you're going to see here are three memes that are pretty humorous in their aspect. You have this one about facts. Why don't you just send it over on a dinosaur? You have this one about SDRs and understanding that your whole prospecting is based upon people that have just been working for you for 6 months. And then here's one where, you know, I took a cold call from somebody and they said it would only be 15 minutes. And what all these three are doing, I'm using images and I'm using very few words to elicit this reaction of frustration at the way things are. And I think this is the most powerful story that you can go ahead and communicate with your own products, with your own solutions in these micro stories, in these small ways. If you can elicit the way to make someone feel frustrated at the way things are right now, you will have an opening to go ahead and communicate them your value proposition to remove that frustration. This is why negative political advertising works. Nobody ever says, I love negative political ads. If you go ahead and submit a poll, everybody in the world hates negative political ads. But people use them because they work, because our brains are wired to think the worst about a situation as opposed to the best about the situation. So rather than fighting a couple billion years of evolution, I say go ahead and roll with it and craft stories that can elicit certain reactions from your prospects, your suspects, and your customers. I also use another tool. I go ahead and create little cartoons. And these are little 6-panel cartoons that I, again, am also crafting something that's hopefully humorous, but something that resonates as a frustration about the way things are. This particular one is about sales training, which is a personal peeve of mine, but the ability for, you know, sales trainers that haven't sold anything in 20 years telling us how to sell in 2017. That elicits a certain reaction. It elicits a certain reaction from people, and it's been beneficial when I've used this kind of communication in order to go ahead and tell my story. But again, it's to go ahead and elicit an emotional connection. And even if the emotional connection is different from the one that you wanted, you've still tapped into that emotion. So if you release something like this into the world and you get a call back or someone coming back to you and saying, I don't believe this, I think sales trainers are great, who do you think you are? They're engaging with you. It's a reaction. So you can roll with it and you can utilize your years of sales expertise to go ahead and maximize on that interaction. The fact remains is that we are speaking into the wilderness here. There's so much noise out there in the world that we're trying to differentiate ourselves. So if by eliciting a reaction can go ahead and do that, then do that thing. I also think the spoken word and the way we speak can go ahead and create an emotional connection in micro stories. Take this. This example is, this is a statement. I went to college in Detroit. That is a true statement. That is a statement, a personal that I'm giving you, but it's a data point. There is nothing in there that tells you anything about me other than I went to college in Detroit. But if you take that sentence and you add just a couple of words, yeah, I went to college in Detroit, you know, the Motor City, but I opted for a liberal arts degree instead of a job at GM like my father did. I've communicated the same information, but I've added a personal touch and an emotional connection that now not only do you know more about me, but you know about my family. You may have a, you know the Motor City in Detroit. Everyone has a vision of Detroit in their head, so there's a kind of thought process there. You know about liberal arts versus working in a factory. There's multiple things that are going on in your subconscious when I go ahead and communicate that way. So in the end, I've told you a micro story about myself, and now we have an emotional connection. And you're more apt to listen to the next sentence that's coming out of my mouth as opposed to when I just made a statement or a data point. You can also do micro stories and emotional connections within your demos. And I think this is incredibly important. I think many of us, either they have in-person demos or web demos of software that we're selling or something else to that effect. And a lot of them are feature and product driven. We want to drive the features. We want to talk about what a particular feature does. Hey, look at what this button does. And I see a lot of that, probably more than I'd like to see. When we do demos, and when we do demos at ZynBit, what I've done and what I've trained our individuals and organization to do is to go ahead and demo from a story aspect. So we have two specific demos when it comes to ZynBit in the inbox. The first is to people like you, to salespeople. And the sales demo is a prospecting story, because quite honestly, most of you hate Salesforce and you don't want to enter any data into Salesforce. If you could get Salesforce out of your life forever, that would probably be the best day for you, or whatever CRM that you're working on, right? So for me to concentrate on the interaction of ZynBit to Salesforce, that's a losing proposition. So rather than that, I craft a story around prospecting, because that's something we all have to do as salespeople. And then what I do is I tell the story about what it's like to prospect now, or what it was like to prospect in the past, and then I tell a little bit about our tracking capabilities, our ability to track website visits, and all these other things that we can do when people are sending email when they have ZynBit enabled, and that tells a story to a salesperson about, that resonates with them, and it's personalized. Now you take the exact same screen, the exact same software, but you communicate it from a Salesforce or a CRM admin's perspective. What they're interested in is how you salespeople don't ever enter your data into the CRM, and they have to chase you down in order to go ahead and enter that data. And how I can show the future, ZynBit is how we can help you with that, how your salespeople, because they're using it for prospecting all the time, are going to be more willing to go ahead and enter data, or how some of our automatic data entry and our synchronization can go ahead and add all that in. Now this is the same product, pretty much the same screens, the same interface, but two separate stories, and they're not based on the features. I mean, we're tying in the features into the story, but what we're really communicating is the actual feeling, the feeling of, as a salesperson, the trouble with prospecting and the issue with prospecting now. We're tying in the feeling of a Salesforce admin and how nobody enters data in Salesforce, and how I'm always the bad guy and people don't like returning my emails because I'm always telling them to update Salesforce. So those are real emotions that people have, and when you can tap into those and tell a story, you can be very, very effective. I guess the whole point around this is from the very beginning, data itself is not a story. And you cannot just communicate data points to people like in a PowerPoint slide, 85% of this, 76% of this, 42% of this, and expect it to resonate with people, because there's so much information out there. There's so many opportunities for us, for our attention to be swayed by one thing or another. Data doesn't resonate. If you were selling skateboards, I would tell you, don't talk about any of what you see on the screen. Don't talk about the titanium hardware. Don't talk about the wheels. Don't talk about, if you were selling skateboards, what you want to do is you want to talk about this. You want to talk about the feeling of getting out there. Talk about, the emotion behind being free, being young, being, having those thoughts where I can just get out on the road and do my thing. You don't want to talk about data. You want to talk about, you would definitely want to talk about the feeling and the emotion behind it. Now, the way I roll this into presentations is very simple. I roll it in like this. I talk a little bit about, and this is kind of what we do in ZynBit here when we talk about the past and what it means. I talk about how sales used to be all about relationships, and how salespeople would go ahead and get in a car and they'd visit each individual client, and they'd speak in person and they'd talk to them, right? And that's how sales used to be. And we used to knock on doors, and we used to have meetings in offices, and it was very, it was very different. It was face to face. We believed it was more personal. But then technology really changed everything, and now we kind of live in a world where we're global citizens, and we have the ability to communicate across great distances. but the ability there is lending itself to be much more impersonal. It's via social, it's via email, it's via telephone, it's via third-party applications that we don't even have any control over. And all of this is collecting data. It's collecting data, and what we're told about the future is data is the future. When we're collecting data, that data is going to be used to model the way we need to sell to people, the way we need to interact with people as we move forward. Because buyers have to traverse this whole thing. The buyer's journey is the most important thing, right? And we have to figure out how people are buying with all this data. And we have to do it soon, because technologies are coming up that are going to revolutionize the B2B sales process. It's already there in B2C. It's already there. Automation is there. People are buying cars on websites. You can't go to the video store to rent movies anymore. That doesn't exist. Things are changing, and how we go ahead and change is the way we is the way we stay relevant within our own careers and within our own chosen field. And that right there is just a three slide deck telling that past, present, future story. And I can tell you from delivering it and from having people interact with it and having customers interact with it, that is much more effective than showing how many customers we have, or showing, you know, the logos of all the customers that we have, and all that other stuff that you see in a lot of different sales decks. Maybe even your own sales decks. I know they used to be in my sales decks. They're no longer in my sales decks because we're communicating this way. Now, all of that stuff will come later. But remember, since I've now connected emotionally to that crocodile brain, and those neurons are firing and everything is happening within my prospect's brain, they're more able and more willing to listen to those statistics. And speaking of statistics, because there is a time to deliver statistics so people will remember them, and there's a time not to, and it's pretty much at the end of that future sense. And I'm going to deliver some to you here as a final thought before we go to any questions. And the final thought is this, is that when you deliver just raw data to people, only 5 to 10% of what they hear is remembered. That's it. But when you communicate through story, 65 to 75% of the information you communicate is remembered by your client, by your prospect, by your audience. And if nothing else I've said through the course of this webinar makes you feel that you should go ahead and engage in story selling, let that one sit, that your ability to go ahead and communicate through story will increase by 6 or 7-fold your ability to go ahead and communicate to clients in a way that they will remember. Now, I've included within this webinar, and you'll get it with the information afterwards, what I call the StorySelling Matrix. And really what it is, it's the ability, I believe you need to target, you need to craft a theme, you need to create characters, you have to develop a conflict, and you have to create good content. So here's an example I use here, and this is an example of maybe I'm selling vending machines, or I'm selling snacks to office managers, right? And the theme is happy employees make happy customers, and the characters in the story are real people. And maybe the conflict is hungry people or mean people, and I can deliver this multi-channel. I can deliver it in video, I can deliver it in audio, I can go ahead and deliver it in a presentation. And what we're really talking about is a story you already know. And it's a story that's communicated very effectively. And I think this probably within the last few years is probably one of the most compelling and the most successful story campaigns out there in the marketing world. And there's no reason that you shouldn't be able to incorporate this level this level of storytelling in your own day-to-day sales. I'm going to give you some tools that can help with this. And so very first, when you go to this particular website, this is a non-sales website. It says common book, common author themes. This has about 150 common themes that you can utilize in your storytelling. And as you go through, you see here, these are just the C's and the D's, but there's a multitude of different themes that you can use for stories. My presentation, that 3-slide presentation that you saw, was based upon this article by Guy Kawasaki, which is the only 10 slides you need in a pitch. And I would urge you to go ahead and go to this website and take a look at that. And if you have a 50 or a 60 slide deck, or even more than 10, you can utilize this information to craft a story to go ahead and communicate within that deck the story that you want. You can go to a meme maker and you can go ahead and pull not only existing memes, but you can make your own memes as well to communicate those emotional connections that you want to. Pixton, the cartoons that I create, you can do that yourself, and you can create it yourself, and they have all the tools that are necessary. All you need to do is provide the stuff that goes in the thought bubbles from your own brain, and everything else, the drawings and everything else, they do for you as well. So you can go ahead and get that done. LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook, there's a lot of people out there telling great stories, not just me, but others. So take a look at those people. You can do searches on topics and posts to go ahead and find what's valuable. And if you really want to get into story and the way story can help you not only in sales but in the rest of your life, is pick up this book by Robert McGee from Amazon, and it's called Story, and it's basically for screenwriters. But as you can probably guess, a lot of the information I've gleaned through the years, I have a copy of this book that I've dog-eared, and this book is something that I have used for years in building decks and communicating my value proposition in a number of different things. You don't need it just to go ahead and pick up the, make your best screenwriter or your screenplay, but you can definitely utilize it to go ahead and craft different stories for yourself, for you and your sales, for you in your sales process. Now, also, I'm going to offer to the people that are on this webinar, as well as the people that have registered for the webinar and viewing the recording, if you go to this link, you can, for free, I will go ahead and provide you a 30-minute mentor session where we can go over a particular story or stories that you want to communicate. We can talk about it, we can bat some ideas around, I can help you a little bit, but this is outside what I do at ZynBit as far as the ability to go ahead. It's not in to show you my software or anything else. This is a 30-minute mentor session. You come to me, you say, hey, I want to work on story. Here's an idea that I had, and I'll go ahead and help you out with it, and we can go ahead and work with that. Now I'll go ahead and open it up for any questions, and we'll see if there's anyone here that has any questions about story or yes, I have one question. Yes, the book by Robert McGee is a screenwriting book, but it has elements of story in it where people can go ahead and utilize those particular elements to go ahead and build particular stories for themselves. So yeah, it is a screenwriting book, but you can pull information from it in order to do that. Yeah, okay, there is another question. Yes, there are specific books on writing, storytelling within sales, and I have a list of those that I'll go ahead and communicate to the people that that have signed up or have viewed the webinar themselves, so they can go ahead and utilize those as well. Oh, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Yeah, the deck, putting together the deck and everything else. There is a model for the deck that I particularly use. So if you all are interested, you can definitely shoot an email to me at Derek.Wyszynski@ZynBit.com, and I can share with you the way I put together that deck and put together the animations and those types of things as well. So you can definitely do that. Let's see here. We do have another question. Let's see here. How does my talking about sales or how sales is wrong get prospects to engage with you? Are they your target audience? That's a great question. Are the people that they're part of my audience. They're actually the end users of the solution that we provide, ZynBit. However, we have a belief, and it's a belief that we've actually worked on the last couple years, is when you're doing traditional prospecting, like cold calling or direct email or something else to that effect, you're probably only going to reach about 3%, the people that are only involved in buying right now, which is about 3% of your target market, right? Your total addressable market, 3 to 5% of them are in a buying process right now. And when we used to do cold calling or cold emails or email marketing, you throw 1,000 emails out or you do 100 cold calls and you get 3 or 4 people that are interested in buying a copier or buying software, whatever you're selling, and you talk to them. We believe the new model is much more nurture, and I want to talk to the other 97%. So when you sign up for this webinar, you know that we asked what CRM you used, and we know we asked your title and those types of things. This is much more of a nurture. We want you to envision and to look at the story that I want to tell is that ZynBit is a brand, and the brand has to do with sales excellence. And when we talk about the problems in sales, when we talk about what's not right in sales, what needs to be changed, when you look at webinars like this, or when you have information that we provide in the Sales Hacker webinar, or when you take my mentor sessions and you come with me and we do a little mentor session, all of that stuff is to build brand, is to build relationship. So when whatever organization you're working for is ready or looking at something, that becomes interested in, that is ready to look at something or buy something, will be part of that conversation. And I can tell you, over the last 18 months that we've developed this particular strategy, I can dial all the way back to webinars and information that I've been able to go ahead and craft a year ago, and people that took those webinars now work for customers of ZynBit that have purchased our software. So there is a direct line and a direct correlation, and it is definitely, and I can show you the proof source, but I really do think that this is the way to go ahead and craft a communication. Okay, getting people, let's see here. Do you mainly use story for getting people on the hook at the prospecting stage? Great question. I do that. When I craft story, I'm trying to go ahead and get people on the hook during the prospecting phase. However, our customer success people, our customer experience people, the people that are in our deployment department, when we're deploying the software, also utilize story in their process. In our training, we also utilize story in our process. We do believe as an organization that story is the best way to communicate in every aspect. So our customer experience people tell story in a different way, and they communicate story in a different way. But yes, for me personally, I utilize it for prospecting. What is my perspective on telling personal stories? Can they be too personal? So yes and no. I think, yeah, you can be, there's the old acronym TMI, right? A little bit too much information. However, I think that the more personal you are before jumping that shark, the more connection that you're going to have. I can tell you, I released an article prior to this storytelling a story selling webinar that was probably the most personal and revealed the most about me and my life than I've ever had before. And it has by far gotten the most views and the most likes and the most comments of any of my other articles. Even though articles I had which were contentious and maybe with clickbaity headlines like cold calling is dead, or let's get rid of commissions. Those are some of my articles that I wrote. I wanted to grab people in. This last article about story selling and the use of stories about my family, about my parents, about my daughter, resonated with people. And it has by far gotten more interaction with large enterprise clients and people from large enterprise clients than any that I have done previously. So if you're sick and tired about hearing about my personal stuff, you're in for it, because I'm going to continue kind of that vein. And we've got a few articles that are coming out about some of the deals that we've done at ZynBit and some of the sales that we've made and some of our wins and some of our losses that we're going to communicate out there to the world, because we really do believe that telling that story will not only help build our brand, but it will enable us to really build on our brand with people. Yes, thanks. Thanks so much for the people that saying you're a fan. You can definitely follow me on LinkedIn. You can also follow me on Twitter at Real Sales Advice, and I release all my data and information there, all my stories. Let's see. I have a question about what are your thoughts on LinkedIn Sales Navigator, and how does it play with ZynBit for sales? Excellent. That's a great question. I myself use LinkedIn Sales Navigator, and as a matter of fact, a few webinars back, I have an example of how to utilize LinkedIn Sales Navigator with ZynBit in order to prospect. And so for that particular individual, I'm going to send you a link to that webinar so you can go ahead and take a look at that. Yes, there is a recording. Someone just asked if there's a recording, and everyone who registered and was invited and took some time here with me today will get a copy of that webinar. Yes, I'll be sending the link. I'll send you guys all the links. You're not on Twitter. Best way to start. Let's see here. Best way to start on Twitter for those of you that aren't on Twitter is to just get a Twitter handle and start following people and sharing their data that you like. Twitter has had some ups and downs, but quite honestly, if you know anything that's going on in the news today, Twitter is the way people communicate. It's the way our president communicates. It's the way our news organizations communicate. It's the way businesses communicate. And I can tell you this, if you want to hear a story, one bad tweet can bring down an airline. And we saw that recently. We saw the ability for social media to really affect what we do as sales, what we do as sales organizations and salespeople. And so yes, if you're on Twitter, just get on Twitter. Just start it up. You don't have to have this grand scheme of things. There's a whole bunch of people. If you just search hashtag sales, there's a whole bunch of salespeople and sales leaders that you can go ahead and follow and share their data and share their posts, and then just start communicating with people. It's just like anything else. It's like the pool is always coldest when you dip your toe in, but when you jump in and you get that shock wears off, you're able to go and then have a good time. And Twitter is a really good time. And I am finding now that Twitter is a much quicker way for me to contact C-level prospects. And there's a webinar that I have in that I'm going to be communicating later. But the ability to utilize social selling, to use email, and to use Twitter and how to communicate to C-levels and how you can communicate with them. It's a great opportunity, and there will be a webinar on that in the future. Well, we're coming up on the end of the hour, so again, thank you so very much for the time that you spent with me today. We'll go ahead and make sure everyone gets a copy of this recording, and you get there are going to be a couple of infographics, a couple of screenshots that are going to be released, and we'll make sure that you have those as well. But again, thanks so much for your time, and you guys please have a wonderful rest of your day. Oh, wait. Oh, yes, have a wonderful rest of your day.